My family told me not to come to Christmas because I brought drama, so I sent them one message that shut them down forever. I'm 31, and 3 weeks ago my family uninvited me from Christmas because they said I brought too much drama to family gatherings. What they didn't expect was for me to respond with a single text message that exposed every toxic secret they'd been hiding for years and changed our family dynamic forever. My name is Gabriel, and this is about how I learned that sometimes the person labeled as the problem is actually the only one telling the truth. Let me start by explaining the family dynamics that led to this explosion, because understanding my role in this family is crucial to what happened. I'm the middle child in a family of 5 kids, sandwiched between my older siblings Madison and Cameron and my younger siblings Brooke and Austin. We're all adults now, ranging from 28 to 35, but the family hierarchy established in childhood has never really changed. Madison, 35, is the golden child who can do no wrong in my parents' eyes. She's a successful lawyer married to another successful lawyer, with 2 picture-perfect children and a house in the suburbs that looks like it came from a magazine. Every family gathering revolves around celebrating Madison's latest achievement or hearing about her children's accomplishments. She's mastered the art of looking perfect on the surface while keeping any real problems carefully hidden from family scrutiny. Cameron, 33, is the charming one who gets away with everything because he makes everyone laugh and has always been Dad's favorite. He's had a string of failed relationships and questionable career choices, but somehow he's always viewed as the lovable screw-up rather than someone with serious issues that need addressing. When Cameron messes up, it's just Cameron being Cameron. When anyone else makes a mistake, it's a character flaw that needs immediate correction. Then there's me. I've always been labeled as the sensitive one, the dramatic one, the one who takes things too seriously and overanalyzes everything. According to my family, I'm the one who brings tension to gatherings by asking uncomfortable questions or refusing to pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I'm the family member who notices when people are unhappy, when relationships are struggling, when someone's behavior is affecting everyone else. Brooke, 29, learned early that staying quiet and agreeable was the path to family acceptance. She never rocks the boat, never challenges anyone, and has perfected the art of changing the subject when conversations get difficult. She's become an expert at reading the room and redirecting attention away from anything that might cause conflict. Austin, 28, is still treated like the baby of the family despite being a grown man with his own apartment and career. He gets away with being irresponsible because everyone still sees him as the youngest, and his opinions are often dismissed as immature even when they're completely valid. My parents, Helen and Richard, have spent decades managing the family image rather than addressing actual problems. They're the type of people who believe that if you don't talk about issues, they don't exist. Their parenting philosophy seems to be based on maintaining the appearance of a happy, successful family rather than fostering genuine emotional health and honest communication. The drama they accuse me of bringing usually involves me pointing out uncomfortable truths that everyone else pretends not to see. Like when I mentioned that Cameron's drinking was getting out of control after he showed up drunk to Austin's college graduation 3 years ago. Or when I asked why Madison's husband never speaks to anyone at family gatherings and always looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Or when I suggested that maybe we should address the fact that Dad has been having obvious affairs for years while Mom pretends not to notice. According to my family, these observations make me a troublemaker who can't just enjoy family time without creating problems. According to me, they make me the only person willing to acknowledge reality instead of participating in elaborate pretense. The tension had been building for months leading up to this Christmas confrontation. Every family gathering seemed to follow the same exhausting pattern. Everyone would pretend everything was perfect. I'd notice something that clearly needed addressing, and then I'd be blamed for creating drama when I brought it up instead of continuing the charade. The breaking point came at Austin's birthday dinner 6 weeks ago. We were all gathered at an expensive restaurant, going through the motions of celebrating, when Cameron showed up obviously intoxicated. Not just tipsy from a drink or two, but genuinely drunk in a way that made him loud, inappropriate, and embarrassing to be around. He was making crude jokes that made the waitstaff visibly uncomfortable, talking loudly about personal family business that other diners could hear, and at one point he knocked over a full glass of red wine that spilled all over Austin's girlfriend's white dress. Everyone just sat there acting like this was normal behavior, making awkward jokes and trying to redirect his attention to keep him from getting worse. When Austin's girlfriend excused herself to go clean up in the bathroom, I could see she was upset and embarrassed. That's when I said something that apparently crossed an invisible family line. Cameron, you're drunk and you're ruining Austin's birthday. Maybe you should call an Uber and go home. The table went completely silent. Not because what I'd said was unreasonable or untrue, but because I'd acknowledged out loud what everyone else was determined to ignore. Cameron got defensive and belligerent, launching into a rambling speech about how I was always judging him and how he was just trying to have fun at his brother's birthday dinner. Mom immediately started making excuses about how he'd had a particularly stressful week at work and was just blowing off steam. Dad changed the subject to sports with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that made it clear the conversation was over. But the damage was done. According to my family, I was the one who had made the evening uncomfortable by attacking Cameron instead of just letting him continue his drunken performance while everyone pretended not to notice. Madison pulled me aside after dinner and delivered what she clearly thought was sage wisdom about family dynamics. Not everything needs to be addressed, Gabriel. Sometimes it's better to just let things go for the sake of family harmony. Cameron wasn't hurting anyone. But what about Austin's sake? What about his girlfriend's embarrassment? What about the fact that Cameron clearly had a drinking problem that was getting progressively worse? Those concerns apparently mattered less than maintaining the comfortable illusion that everything was fine. The pattern repeated itself relentlessly at every subsequent family gathering. I'd notice something problematic, I'd mention it or try to address it constructively, and then I'd be blamed for bringing negativity to what should have been a positive family experience. It was like being punished for having functioning eyes and a working conscience. At Madison's daughter's birthday party, I suggested that maybe Cameron shouldn't be drinking around the kids after he'd already had several beers before noon. I was told I was being controlling and judgmental. At Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner, I asked if everything was okay when Dad spent half the evening stepping outside to take work calls that obviously weren't work-related. I was told I was being paranoid and creating problems where none existed. 3 weeks ago, the situation reached its inevitable conclusion when Mom called me to discuss Christmas plans. The conversation started normally enough, with her asking about my schedule and whether Christina would be joining us for dinner. Gabriel, your father and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you don't come to Christmas this year, she said in that carefully modulated tone she uses when she's trying to sound reasonable while saying something completely unreasonable. I was so shocked that I didn't respond immediately. In 31 years, I'd never been uninvited from a family gathering. It's just that every time we get together as a family, there seems to be some kind of conflict or tension, she continued, as if she was explaining something obvious. And we want this Christmas to be peaceful and enjoyable for everyone. Are you saying the conflict and tension are my fault? I asked, genuinely needing clarification about how she was framing this situation. I'm saying that you have a tendency to bring up difficult topics at inappropriate times. Madison and Cameron agree that maybe some space would be good for everyone right now. So my siblings had been discussing me behind my back and had collectively decided that I was the problem that needed to be removed from family gatherings. The solution to family dysfunction wasn't addressing the actual problems. It was eliminating the person who noticed them. What difficult topics are you referring to? I asked, genuinely curious about how they were characterizing my concerns in their private discussions. You know what I mean, Gabriel. The way you criticized Cameron at Austin's birthday, the comments you made about Madison's marriage last Christmas, the things you've said about your father and me. It just creates an uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone else. I realized then that my family had completely rewritten history in their minds. My attempts to address real, observable problems had been reframed as me being difficult and dramatic for no reason other than personal dysfunction. So instead of addressing Cameron's drinking, Madison's marriage problems, or Dad's affairs, you've decided the problem is me mentioning that these things exist. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, Mom said, her voice getting sharper. You can't just let things be. Everything has to be a crisis with you. After I hung up the phone, I spent hours questioning myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too sensitive, too quick to notice problems, too unwilling to just go along with family denial for the sake of keeping everyone comfortable. But then I started thinking about the specific incidents they were referring to, and I realized something crucial. I hadn't been creating drama. I'd been responding to drama that already existed, but that everyone else was determined to ignore. I decided to write a message that would finally force them to confront the difference between acknowledging problems and causing them. That's when I decided to write the message that would change everything forever. I spent hours crafting it, making sure every word was accurate and every accusation was something I could back up with specific examples that everyone in the family had witnessed. I wasn't going to let them paint me as the crazy one anymore. If they wanted to exclude me from Christmas for bringing drama, I was going to show them what that drama actually consisted of versus what they were choosing to ignore. The message I sent to the family group text was longer than anything I'd ever posted, but every line felt necessary. Since I've been uninvited from Christmas for bringing drama to family gatherings, I want to clarify what that drama actually consists of. Apparently, I'm dramatic for mentioning that Cameron has been showing up drunk to family events for over a year and needs help. I'm dramatic for noticing that Madison's husband looks miserable at every gathering and wondering if their marriage is okay. I'm dramatic for acknowledging that Dad has been having affairs for years while Mom pretends not to know about them. But none of you seem to think it's dramatic when Cameron actually shows up drunk and makes everyone uncomfortable. None of you think it's dramatic when Madison brings her husband who refuses to participate in conversations and creates obvious tension. None of you think it's dramatic when Dad disappears during family events to take phone calls from women who aren't his wife. I'm not the one creating problems in this family. I'm just the one refusing to pretend the problems don't exist. If acknowledging reality makes me too difficult to have around, then maybe this family isn't as healthy as you want to believe. Have a peaceful Christmas. I'll be spending mine with people who value honesty over appearances. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My phone started buzzing immediately. The first response was from Cameron, coming in just minutes after my message. "This is complete garbage, Gabriel. I don't have a drinking problem, and you have no right to attack me publicly like this. You've always been jealous that people actually enjoy being around me." Madison followed quickly with a much longer message about how I'd crossed every possible line by bringing up her marriage and Dad's personal business in a group text where everyone could see it. "Some things are private, Gabriel. Just because you think you notice problems doesn't give you the right to humiliate family members publicly." Mom called within 10 minutes, crying and asking how I could say such hurtful things about the family. "How could you write such terrible things about your father? About Cameron? We've always supported you, and this is how you repay us." But when I asked her which specific things I'd written were untrue, she couldn't answer. She just kept saying I was hurting people unnecessarily and destroying family relationships for no good reason. Dad didn't respond at all initially, which somehow felt more telling than if he denied everything. His silence suggested that he knew I was right, but couldn't figure out how to respond without admitting to things he'd been denying for years. But the response that surprised me came from Austin. "Gabriel's not wrong about any of this. Maybe instead of being mad at him for saying it, we should be mad at ourselves for ignoring it for so long." That message was followed by another buzz from Brooke, who never took sides in family conflicts. "I know you're hurt, but did you have to air everything in a group text? This is going to make things so much worse for everyone." That's when I realized that Brooke's response perfectly encapsulated our family's dysfunction. She wasn't concerned about Cameron's drinking, Dad's affairs, or Madison's marital problems. She was concerned about me mentioning them openly instead of continuing to pretend they didn't exist. The next few hours brought a flood of individual calls and texts from various family members, each trying their own version of damage control. Madison called twice, first to yell at me for embarrassing her, then to try a different approach where she acknowledged that her marriage had some issues but insisted that airing them publicly was cruel and unnecessary. Just because something is true doesn't mean it needs to be said, she argued during our second conversation. Some of us prefer to handle our problems privately, but that was exactly the issue. They weren't handling their problems privately. They were ignoring their problems completely while expecting everyone else to pretend not to notice the obvious consequences. Cameron's response was more predictable. He called me at 11 o'clock that night, clearly drunk, rambling about how I'd always been jealous of him and how I was trying to turn the family against him out of spite. The irony of him calling me drunk to deny that he had a drinking problem was apparently completely lost on him. "You've always thought you were better than everyone else," he slurred into the phone. "Always sitting there judging us, acting like you're so perfect. Well, guess what, Gabriel? Nobody likes the family police." The most heartbreaking conversation was with Mom the next day. She called not to apologize for uninviting me from Christmas, but to ask how I could hurt the family by exposing private matters that should have stayed within the immediate family. "Your father made some mistakes, but we're working through them privately," she said, her voice shaky. "You had no right to bring that up in front of everyone." "Working through them privately?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Mom, he's still having affairs. Everyone in the family knows about them. The only person pretending they're not happening is you. That's between your father and me, Gabriel. No, it's not. When Dad brings his mood swings and guilt to family gatherings, when you're obviously unhappy and taking it out on everyone else, when the whole family has to walk on eggshells around your marriage problems, it affects all of us. She hung up on me after that, but not before saying something that really stung. I never thought my own son would be so cruel. But the conversation that gave me the most hope came from Austin 3 days later. He called to tell me that he'd actually confronted Cameron about his drinking after reading my message. I never said anything before because I didn't want to cause problems in the family, Austin admitted. But watching you get blamed for pointing out something that's obviously true made me realize how backwards that is. Austin had offered to help Cameron find a treatment program and had set clear boundaries about not enabling his drinking anymore. Cameron had gotten angry and accused Austin of ganging up on him with me, but Austin had held firm. I told him that you weren't wrong about any of it, Austin said, and that maybe instead of being mad at you for caring enough to notice when he's struggling, he should be grateful. That conversation made me realize that my message had accomplished something important, even if it had blown up the family dynamic completely. For the first time, someone else was willing to acknowledge reality instead of participating in the collective denial that had been poisoning our relationships for years. Christmas came and went without me, and honestly, it was one of the most peaceful holidays I'd had in years. Instead of spending the day walking on eggshells and pretending everything was fine while watching my family's dysfunction play out in real time, I spent it with friends who actually enjoyed each other's company and could have honest conversations without anyone getting blamed for bringing up difficult topics. But the real revelation came from Austin, who called me the day after Christmas to fill me in on what I'd missed. According to Austin, the Christmas gathering was exactly the kind of disaster that proved my point. Cameron showed up drunk again, this time getting into a heated argument with Madison's husband that ended with him storming out of the house and driving away despite being obviously intoxicated. Dad spent most of the day on his phone, stepping outside repeatedly to take calls that were clearly not work-related. Mom was tense and snappy with everyone, making passive-aggressive comments about people who abandon their families during the holidays, while obviously being upset about Dad's behavior. It was exactly the kind of drama you supposedly bring to these things, Austin said, except you weren't even there. Turns out the drama comes from the people who actually have problems, not from the person who points them out. The breaking point came when Brooke, who never spoke up about anything, finally lost her temper and told everyone that they'd scapegoated me for problems that had nothing to do with me. She said that uninviting you didn't solve anything because you weren't the source of the problems in the first place, Austin reported. Mom started crying. Cameron had already left, and Madison spent the rest of the day complaining about how the family was falling apart. But the most significant development was that Dad had apparently been confronted by Mom about his affairs, finally. The conversation had happened in their bedroom, but Austin said he could hear raised voices and crying through the walls. I think your message forced them to finally have conversations they've been avoiding for years, Austin said. It's messy and uncomfortable, but at least it's honest for the first time. 3 days after Christmas, I got an unexpected text from Madison. Can we talk? I owe you an apology. When we met for coffee, she looked exhausted and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. The perfect facade she'd maintained for years seemed to have cracked completely. She admitted that her marriage had been struggling for over a year, and that she'd been hoping that if no one talked about it, maybe the problems would somehow fix themselves. I was so angry at you for mentioning it publicly because it made it real, she said, tears in her eyes. As long as no one was acknowledging it, I could pretend it wasn't happening. She also apologized for supporting the decision to uninvite me from Christmas. You weren't wrong about any of it. I just didn't want to deal with the truth because dealing with it meant admitting that my perfect life wasn't actually perfect. Madison told me that she and her husband had started couples therapy the week after Christmas, finally admitting that their marriage needed serious professional help if it was going to survive. The most surprising development came a month later when Dad called me directly. We hadn't spoken since my message, and I honestly wasn't sure if he'd ever acknowledge what I'd said about his affairs. I owe you an apology, he said without any preamble. Not for having problems, but for letting you take the blame for pointing them out. He admitted that he'd been having affairs on and off for 5 years, and that the family's refusal to acknowledge it had enabled him to continue without facing real consequences for his behavior. It was easier to let everyone pretend it wasn't happening than to deal with what I was doing to your mother and our family, he said. But watching what happened at Christmas made me realize that the problems weren't going away just because we weren't talking about them. Dad told me that he and Mom were in counseling and that he'd ended all contact with other women. He also said something that really stuck with me. You've always been the conscience of this family, and we resented you for it instead of listening to you. Cameron took longer to come around, but eventually he reached out too. He'd started attending AA meetings after Austin's confrontation and was beginning to understand how his drinking had affected not just himself, but everyone around him. I always thought you were just being dramatic when you called me out, he said during a difficult phone conversation 6 weeks after Christmas. But when I started getting sober, I realized that everyone walking on eggshells around my drinking was just enabling me to get worse. He apologized for years of making family gatherings uncomfortable while I got blamed for the tension his behavior created. The family dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of everyone pretending problems didn't exist, we were finally having honest conversations about the issues that had been poisoning our relationships for years. It wasn't easy or comfortable, but it was real in a way our family interactions had never been before. It's been 4 months since I sent that message, and my family looks completely different now. Not perfect, but honest in a way we'd never managed before. Cameron has been sober for 3 months. Madison and her husband are working on their marriage with professional help. Dad and Mom are rebuilding their relationship based on truth rather than denial. Most importantly, the family has stopped scapegoating me for noticing problems. When issues come up now, we address them directly instead of blaming whoever points them out. The experience taught me that being labeled as dramatic or difficult isn't always about your behavior. Sometimes it's about other people's discomfort with truth. Healthy families don't punish members for noticing problems. They address the problems instead of shooting the messenger. My relationship with my family is stronger now than it's ever been. Not because we stopped having problems, but because we stopped pretending the problems didn't exist. What do you think? Was I wrong to air family business so publicly, or was it the only way to break through years of denial and dysfunction? Sometimes the truth has to be loud enough to cut through all the noise of pretending everything is fine.